everybody, really, for coming. You don't know how much I appreciate it. Now, to get down to a little business, I am basically a visual cripple. So I actually had a very good friend who shall remain nameless, but that friend knows who they are, who offered to read this for me. But my ego, which has gotten me in trouble all my life, wouldn't allow me to do that. So you're just going to have to struggle along while I get through this. So let me set the scene. This is a scene from fairly early in the book. And this patient has had what's referred to as a lap his, which means a laparoscopic hysterectomy. And things aren't going very well. And for those of you who haven't read the book, it's a book about a woman who comes in for a routine procedure and things don't go well. And then the hospital has to decide what they're going to tell and what they're not going to tell. So there's, early on in this little reading, there's a woman named Susan Stone, and she's a maternal fetal medicine person who happens to get dragged into what's going on in the scene. There's another resident physician, a chief resident physician named Sally Woodson, who you'll hear about in this. And there is a anesthesiologist who just goes by the name Mythicary, Dr. Mythicary. He's in this scene. And let's see, there's one more. There's a nurse named Janie Wallace who is only named by Janie, but she's one of the recovery room nurses who's taking care of the patient whose name is Carla. So at any rate, Dr. Susan Stone comes over to lend a hand because they can't tell whether Carla is bleeding or what's going on with her. And so the scene goes like this. That's a fluid pocket, and it measures 12 by 9 centimeters. Warren is the main protagonist of this, the doctor who operated on her. Warren, for sure, she's doing quite a bit of bleeding in there. She removed the transducer from Carla's belly and handed it to Sally. Sally took it and placed it back in its holder on the machine's cart after wiping it off. Thanks, Suze. Warren, please, anytime. We've got to move, gang. Warren did an excellent job of masking his fear. He made a phone call while the team made preparations to move Carla back to the operating room. Main OR, Kelly Hippler speaking. Kelly, this is Dr. Warren Chambers. I'm in the L&D recovery room, and I have a critical patient that I need to take back. She had a lap his this morning. Can you get a crew up here ASAP? How bad is she? Her pressure is 76/48. Can you get a crew up here now? Dr. Chambers, you know those ORs up there close at 1 o'clock. I'm not saying that I won't send a crew, but if your patient is really bad off, get her down here and we'll have an OR all set up and staffed by the time you arrive. Warren reluctantly agreed. Everything will be in place for us? You guarantee? Yes, I do. We're on our way. And Kelly, please notify the blood bank. Let them know we're going to be using the massive transfusion protocol. Patient's name? Carla Williams. Her blood bank labs from this morning are still good. The conversation took less than 2 minutes. We're going to the main OR, Warren told the group. The vital sign monitor was already unplugged and placed on the gurney besides Carla, off of its bed stand, and placed on the gurney. It weighed about 3 pounds and operated on batteries when needed. The 2 IV flow regulators also had battery capability. They were unplugged from their wall sockets and stayed on the rolling floor stands and were wheeled alongside the gurney. Janie placed a portable oxygen tank between Carla's legs and connected the tank to the face mask via hose. They began the bulky, necessarily slow move to the elevators as fast as they could. When the team arrived on the second floor, they had to travel to the other side of the hospital. Their movement was deliberate, but running was out of the question. It was far too unsafe for Carla and her caregivers. 13 minutes after leaving L&D, they were standing at the receiving desk inside the main OR suite. A young woman with earlobe-length coal black hair and clad in a green scrub suit met them as they entered the suite. "I'm Pauline, one of the techs here. I'll take you to the holding area while we wait for a crew." "Wait for a crew? Are you out of your mind?" Pauline was visibly startled. "Kelly promised me a room would be ready and staffed when we got here," Warren said tersely through clenched teeth. "Her secretary paged me, but that's not the message I got. She told me they were calling in a crew." Her voice cracked. "You don't have people here?" "We do, for true emergencies." Warren struggled. "If this isn't a true emergency, I don't know what the hell." He looked at Carla and then quickly up at Sue. They both realized Carla wasn't breathing. Warren ignored whatever authority Pauline had. He moved toward the door ahead of him. The group followed his instructions and pushed the gurney through the door marked OR 3. "Call a code now," he yelled, while letting down the gurney's side rail. With the first two fingers of his right hand, Warren felt the weak, thready pulse in Carla's neck. He fought the tsunami of anxiety and fear that were poised to overwhelm him. Instead, without hesitation, he started mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Sue located a handheld resuscitation balloon bag, handed it to Warren. He formed a tight seal over Carla's mouth and nose, while he, with the face cover portion of the device, and rhythmically squeezed air into her lungs with his right hand. Janie connected an oxygen line to the bag's side port. "We'll take over, Dr. Chambers. You can go and scrub," Mithikeri told Warren from the head of Carla's gurney. He arrived seconds earlier with a nurse anesthetist and the 3-member code team. They attached electrocardiogram leads to Carla's chest and moved her to the operating table while continuing to breathe for her with the balloon bag. "She's in V-fib," Mithikeri called out from the head of the table, where he was looking at the cardiac monitor screen. Ventricular fibrillation is an abnormality wherein the heart's electrical conduction pathways initiate an unsynchronized contraction pattern. The heart muscle quivers like a, quote, "bag of worms," unquote. This uncoordinated activity is dysfunctional and doesn't allow the chambers to fill with blood or the heart muscle to push the blood out to supply the body. Carla was in cardiac arrest. The code team began CPR. "Stop for a second, let me intubate," Mithikeri told the team. He had the tube in on his first attempt. "Stop CPR," the leader of the CPR team said a minute later. He was responding to a hand signal from Mithikeri. "Continue," Mithikeri repeated 3 seconds later after listening to Carla's lungs with the stethoscope. "The tube's in the right place. Continue CPR." "He's pushing amiodarone and epinephrine," Mithikeri's nurse anesthetist called out, while writing down doses and times given. "We're also hanging a magnesium drip." 3 minutes after the last drug was pushed, the code team leader commanded loudly, "Stop CPR! Everyone stand clear!" He positioned the defibrillator paddles on Carla's chest, and in an effort to restart her heart, he delivered an electric shock powerful enough to cause Carla's entire body to convulse violently. Before resuming CPR, the team waited for Mythicary's assessment. "We have a pulse," the anesthesiologist yelled. "We're going to open her," Warren said from just beyond the foot of the table. He and Sally were dressed in their sterile coverings. He knew Carla's heart stopped because it wasn't getting enough oxygen, because she didn't have enough blood. Her bleeding had to be stopped to give the transfusions any chance of working. "I'm ready, Dr. Chambers," the scrub nurse said in a light Filipino accent. "Scalpel," Warren called. He cut through the rust-tinged skin, the discoloration caused by the hastily applied sterile prep solution. Despite his almost imperceptible hand tremors, Warren's movements were fast and precise. He tried to portray a calm confidence and not succumb to the racing heart and emotional terror he felt. His intensity of focus rendered him almost oblivious to everything else. He stared through Carla's open incision. "My God, there must be 2 liters of blood and clot in there." "Sterile basin," Sally called out. "Here, Sally, bring it right to the edge of the incision. And nurse, get 3 liters of warm saline ready." Using both hands and a frantic pace, Warren scooped out the abdomen's bloody contents while Sally assisted with the surgical suction tube. "Liter of saline," he almost yelled just before they finished. "Sally, dump in the whole liter. I'll suction, and then we'll dump in another one." "More saline?" she asked. Her voice quivered. She poured in the second liter. "We'll leave it in and just watch. We'll look through it for any signs of bleeding. They're sometimes easier to see when the bleeding is into sterile, clear saline." Carla was receiving a second unit of blood when Mythicary said with exasperation, "She's coded again." "Okay, step back," Warren said to his operating team. The code team, now sterilely clad, started CPR. "We're pushing an amp of epinephrine and bicarb," the CNRA announced. Certified nurse anesthetist. "Everyone stand clear." Carla's body jerked again from the electricity that coursed through her. "We're pushing a whole amp of epi." The CPR resumed. "I think we need to open her," Dr. Aaron Myers said quietly to Mythicary. She was the chief of surgical trauma who arrived 4 minutes earlier with 2 members of her team. She was sterilely masked, gowned, and gloved. Her long dishwater blonde hair was stuffed under her surgical cap. With her 6'5" height, she towered over Mythicary at the head of the table. "I don't disagree," Mythicary responded with resignation. "Dr. Chambers, we're going to open her chest," Myers said. "I'm going to keep looking," Warren said. He motioned his team back to the table. Splash her chest," Myers shouted. Carla's chest was doused with sterile prep solution in an instant, and Myers was in her chest cavity in what seemed like another instant. From her position just across the short curtain between them that divided the crowded operating table, the chief trauma surgeon looked directly into Mythicary's eyes when she said, "Got my hands on her heart, and I'm squeezing." Myers compressed the heart about once every second, to force blood flow through Carla's body. This technique was more effective than CPR, and it was the last option.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
Don't stop.
so at any rate, people tell me that I should stop saying at any rate. I'm happy to answer any questions. I will tell you that I wanted to write a novel since before I could remember, and I never had that story to write about. And I also didn't have the courage coming out of college, being much younger, to be a writer. It takes a lot of courage to decide that you're going to be a writer, and I didn't have that, and I didn't have the discipline. Well, by the time I got through medical school, I can safely say I did have discipline. And I toyed around with writing some, but this story popped up. This is loosely based on something that happened. I would say 85% of the characters are made up out of complete whole cloth, complete fiction. But the story grabbed me, and it just drove me. And I tell everybody with my great writing talent, it only took 12 years to finish the book. So, and I truly learned that it's not writing, it's rewriting. So, with that said, this book has been rewritten. I can't even count the number of times. I thank COVID because I was out of the hospital for about 3 weeks, and it was one time in my life where I actually can look back and say I used those 3 weeks. I worked 6 to 7 hours a day until I got the final copy done. And if my neighbors were listening, they probably thought I was crazy because I'm one of those people who reads each sentence out loud for the cadence and all. So, having said that, I'm open for any questions that anybody has. And again, thank you all so much for coming. Yes? Yes?
Did you wait to write this? You're retired now, right?
No.
Oh, yeah. You're not retired.
I was semi-retired for a time. But yeah, now I'm not. I'm not even semi anymore.
I just wondered if you waited because it brings up a lot of there's controversy and so forth. And if you had waited until you were off of this.
No, actually I didn't. I started writing this maybe a year after it happened. And like I said, that great writing talent, it has been a long time, 12 years. And so no, I didn't wait till I was retired. And I didn't always work evenly on it. I hit this period of great productivity, and I had this crazy schedule. Lunch would be made on the weekends for the rest of the week because I was working full time at this point. I'd get up at like 3:30 in the morning. I would walk and then be at the bus stop by 5:45. I'd get to my desk by 6:30, and I'd have from 6:30 to 8:30 to write. And that went on for a couple years. That was probably the most productive time that I had. I got more done during the week when I was pressed and had the work than I ever did on the weekends. So.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Stan.
Hi.
How did the process work? I know you would write and then you would present the information to the publisher and they would come back and tell you to need to change this and you would change this. Was there a lot of back and forth for you?
Oh, no, I wish I had a publisher. I mean, I have a publisher now, and that is just, I'm still pinching myself. My wife will tell you, I'm still pinching myself that somebody decided to publish it. But no, there was no back and forth. But what I did, I bought a book called How to Write a Damn Good Novel, and I actually read the book from front to back, and it was kind of a how-to. So he first suggested that you write an outline, and some authors write an outline that's 3 pages. Mine was 45. I had dialogue and everything. And then the other thing that he suggested was that you write character biographies about every character in the book. And so I wrote character biographies about 10 major characters. And those biographies range from 4,000 words to 6,500 words. And a couple of them I didn't want to stop writing about because I kind of really liked them a lot. But, and then I signed up, as many of you might know, Iowa University has, the University of Iowa has probably the most famous writer school in the world. I knew that as an undergrad. And so they offer what's called a Summer Writers Festival. And so I signed up for a weekend course called Artificial Respiration, Breathing Life into Your Characters. And then the next year I signed up for advanced novel writing. And out of the 12 people, I figured I was tied for about number 8. That was a bit over my head. But the bad thing is that, Stanley doesn't read. And so I didn't figure out until about 10 days before the course that I was supposed to have a first chapter that I submitted, because it was a workshop type thing. Because I was too busy writing character biographies and having a great time. So I had to throw together a first chapter, all of which changed greatly. So I did go to workshops, and then one of the best ones that I did was very local in Detroit. There's an arts organization, and the woman there, her name was Maureen Dunphy. She was really great. And then I went out to San Francisco to take a course by a guy named Tom Jenks, who was quite a taskmaster. And he has bona fides this long. He put together posthumously a Hemingway novel. He's edited, Tom Wolfe, Joyce Carol Oates. I mean, his list of people that he edited are forever. And the course was a week long. There was a lot of work. And then I decided that instead of going to seminars, I need to just sit down and write the damn book. But there was I got feedback from the workshops, people. And I'll tell you, that's one of the most difficult things to do, is to decide which criticisms you're going to take and which you aren't. Because you don't want to be so egotistical that, you're not going to take advice from anyone. But on the other hand, you also have to have the strength of personality or character or ego to know that the person who's giving you this criticism, their vision might not be the same as yours. So it's a delicate balancing act. That's a short answer to your question. So.
Can I have a question?
Yes, sir.
You described the medical trauma in such great detail. In your career, have you experienced a number of instances like this, medical trauma?
I've probably experienced 2 maternal deaths in my career. One of them much more vivid than another. So the short answer is yes, I have. And thank God most of the medical traumas around childbirth, we were able to stop the trauma before the patient died. But in one particular case that I remember so clearly, we weren't successful. So, and as you all know, maternal mortality, maternal death in this country is disgusting. We have the highest rate of maternal death of any country, any industrialized country in the world.
And it's increasing.
So, yes. You write about what you know, that's what they say. Yes.
The names of your characters, did you make them up, or did you have friends, or did you sell it for charity, someone's name?
Economics. The one character in the book who I memorialized was a guy, I don't know if Valerie is here, but Valerie's brother, who Richard and I went to school with. And this guy was just unforgettable because he was so positive and had such a great smile. I didn't use his first name, but I used his last name to memorialize him. Everybody else was made up. I don't even know if Mythikeri would pass as an Indian name because he was supposed to be a character from India. So I made up all the names, and one of the other knocks is that I got too many characters. So I shouldn't tell you the knocks. You should read the book. Buy the book, and then, you know.
Excuse me,
So,
I have a
yeah.
question. You have the key character, Pauline. How did that name come about?
See, that's my sister. That's our mother's name. Yeah. That was pure chance. Yeah.
Question here.
Yes.
So in writing the book,
Mhm.
at what point did you just get stuck and really had to pull from wherever you had to pull from to get the motivation to continue on to get to the end of the book? Did you have like writer's block?
Never. I never had writer's block because I had an outline. Now the outline changed, and so if you write an outline, if anyone's interested in writing a book and you write an outline, don't be wedded to it. And one of the things that happened to me was I had constructed the outline in such a way that all the mystery was given away before the end of the story. So I read an article by some author who said the book that you write is never the one that you plan to write. So, and that's true in this case because I actually wanted to do a non-linear story. This story is pretty linear. It's got flashbacks, but it's pretty linear. And I decided that I didn't have the talent to do that. So I just decided to go with basically a straight line story. But in terms of getting stuck, I don't think so because I had the outline. There were a couple plot challenges that I had to think about, but I guess I never considered those as being stuck. I just thought my way through them. And then one of the toughest things was a really good friend of mine in D.C. who likes to give me all kinds of grief. Because the book, I had a title from the book from the beginning, and it was called A Full Disclosure, or it was called Full Disclosure, and he said, yeah, but I think there's another book out there named Full Disclosure. So I looked it up, and doggone it, there was, and it was a police story. So I thought and thought and thought, and actually it came to me on a walk to call it A Fight for Full Disclosure. Then if you go online, there must be 5 books called Full Disclosure. There really are. And one of them, I am so glad that my publisher, he actually didn't have A Fight for Full Disclosure. He called it Full Disclosure, and I said, no, I gotta have A Fight for Full Disclosure. So about 2 months ago, I told Shelley this. I was looking up Full Disclosure books, and of course, Full Disclosure by Stormy Daniels. That's true. That's the name of her memoir. Yes.
I often hear about writers who talk about a book and there's a secondary character who just will not hush and wants their story told. Are any of your characters clamoring to have their story told?
I don't know. I don't know. There are a couple of them in there that are that I enjoyed writing their biographies so much that I might, resurrect them. But no, I can't think of one offhand. So I don't know that I'm going to do another book about this character. I don't think I am because I have an idea about what I want to write about, and it's different. So, yes.
Have you received any, is there any controversy or people who have read the book and who are on a different side of full disclosure, who had an issue with that?
Well, one of my lawyer friends read it. Lawyer friends as opposed to lawyer wife. But one of my lawyer friends read it, and he did not have the, feedback, because there's a little dig at both the defending lawyers and the plaintiff's lawyers in the book. Nobody gets off clean. I'm trying to think of anybody else on the other side. No, and one of the people who is a pretty identifiable character, and I was really afraid when he read it. He told me, "Man, I came off like a hero. Thanks." So there is another character in the book that somebody that I was pretty harsh with, but I doubt that he'd read the book once he saw my name on it. So, yes.
Are there any authors or stories that you're inspired by that inspired this?
Inspired this book?
This book, or just inspire you in general?
Well, yeah. One of the most inspiring authors, and I'm always embarrassed to say this because in many ways he was not a nice person. He was a racist and he was an anti-Semite, but Ernest Hemingway was a big influence on me. Until I, finally realized that I'm not Ernest Hemingway. I will never be Ernest Hemingway, and it's okay for me to write a sentence longer than 6 words. He was famous for his short sentences. But a lot of people have influenced me. Toni Morrison, she was an influence. Richard Wright, John Steinbeck, Ralph Ellison, of course, and he was an inspiration. I don't think I have it in me to write a book like that, and apparently he didn't have it in him to write another book like that because he never wrote another novel while he was alive, which I have that specter. I don't want to be that guy. I do want to write another one. But yeah, there are lots of influences. One of my ones that I should be embarrassed to say is Charles Bukowski. I loved him. Time magazine called him the poet laureate of American lowlife. You might imagine. But there have been, so many. Shakespeare a little bit. I don't want to seem too highbrow, but after all, I was a failed English major, so I got to do a lot of that stuff. Yeah. Yes.
When is the movie planned then? Gonna star in it, or?
No, I think I'll spare the public. But it's so funny because what had happened to get a first novel published is, it's really, really tough. And I figured I'd just collect my 25 rejections and then go on Amazon because they'll publish your whole book for you. And so what had happened was I heard this story on NPR about this publisher that was connected to NYU that published medical books, but they also published some fiction. And so I tracked this story down that I had heard 8 years before. I tracked it down on the internet and I called them and I asked the woman if they would accept an unsolicited manuscript, because many, many publishers will not accept an unsolicited manuscript. Certainly the big 5 publishers will not. So she said yes. So I got the thing all nice and tidied up and I sent it to her at 5 a.m. and by 11 a.m. I had my first rejection. So I was on my way. I worked on the book for 2 more years, and my brother-in-law, is he here? Dan, you're here?
Over here.
Yeah, so Dan does not BS, and he read the book, and he had some books from the publisher that wound up taking my book, and he said, I think your book is better than these other books. You should try sending it to this publisher. So this is a long about way, Chuck, of getting to your question.
Okay, take your time.
So I sent the book off. First of all, I had to go online and figure out what a query letter is because I had no idea. And it's just a one-page letter. Here's my book. Here's why you should publish it. Here's who I am. And in this case, they wanted a marketing scheme. And so they only wanted the first 5 pages of the manuscript. So I sent it off at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. And Friday afternoon, I got an email from them saying they wanted the whole manuscript. I'm going like, that cannot be a bad sign. Monday, they emailed me and told me they wanted to publish the book. And I was on cloud 9. I called my poor, long-suffering wife, and what did I say? Shelley, I'm short of breath. What's the matter? Have you gone to the hospital? I said, no, I'm short of breath. So what's the matter? And I said, they're going to publish my book. So, at any rate, Chuck, to finally get to what the hell you asked me. 1 minute, I'm worried about how to write a query letter, and the next minute, I'm worried about my TV and motion picture rights. Because they sent me a contract, and of course I got a lawyer, and I invited her. I don't think she's here. Her name is Julie Finch. And she said that the split's 50-50. The contract lasts for 4 years, but the split on the television movie rights are 50-50. And she said, you know, if you were Bruce Willis, the split would probably be 80-20. But you're not. So at any rate, if somebody would pick it up, and then the other thing is that just because somebody options your book, a good friend of mine who is a television reporter in Detroit, actually is retiring, one of the reporters at their TV station wrote this great spy novel, and somebody optioned it, and they were going to do a series, and so he quit his job, and they never made the series. So I'm, as many of you know, I Shelley houseboy. So it doesn't matter to me at that point. I still will have a job. Yes. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
As a physician, would you ever not want somebody to have full disclosure? Are there situations where you don't think full disclosure is the way to handle that patient?
Maybe if the patient was had some mental health issue and the family was involved and didn't want that, or if there was no family involved, perhaps not. But I never thought of that. That's the subject of my next book.
I'll
When-
take 20%.
When Not Disclosed by Valerie and Stanley. So, no, I can't. And let me tell you something. Hospitals, I've just gone through this I was at a different hospital when this all occurred. The hospital I'm at now, we just had a case, without going into any details, where we clearly screwed up. And I called administration and said, we need to do a full disclosure. And they just, no, lockstep. And quite frankly, and let me tell you something, I hate medical malpractice cases. I do. I mean, I've acted as an expert. Probably 70% of the time is defending physicians. 30% of the time I do some plaintiff's cases because you got to be honest about it. The thing is just don't lie on either side, right? I hope this patient sues because the hospital had every opportunity to come to her and say, we screwed this up, and you know we know that money is not going to bring things back, but we want to do this just to show you that we understand that we screwed up and we've caused you heartache, and that's the best we can do. So this idea of coming clean with patients is not universally accepted, and there's part of that in the book, that argument, to both sides of it. So, yeah. Yes.
Like a lot of writers, I find it easy to start projects. It's finishing them that gets to be hard.
Right.
How did you keep yourself going and for those 12 years and those 2 hours a day that chunk when you were doing 4 hours a day? I just wish I could do that. How did you do it?
I went to see one of my favorite authors is another one that influenced me, Walter Mosley. And he gave a talk, and I can tell you how ignorant I was at his talk, but one of the things that he said, somebody got up and said, you know, I started a novel, and then I started another novel, and then I have a book of poetry, and I just don't know how to finish. And he said, that's simple, just work on one. And so, you know, and this is what happens, I think. You're writing, you get all these other ideas. I only caved in one time. One time. I was sitting on a tour bus, and I was in Barcelona, and I was half drunk, and this story just came to me. And so I went and sat at an outdoor cafe. This is in the midst of writing this book, and I wrote the story out on 5 beers in an afternoon. But that's the only time I deviated to write anything else creatively other than this book. And I was really conscious about that. I am not going to start anything else. I am just going to write this book. So with one screw up, I did it. And you know, the story drove me. That was the thing. This story to me was, you know, important, and it was a story that I wanted to tell, and I wanted to tell it as well as I could. So.
There's a question over there.
Yes. Where?
To your left.
Oh, yes.
What is your biggest takeaway that you had writing this book that you would want to take to the next book that you write?
My base takeaway. I guess it's not a positive one, it's a negative one. I'm going to try like hell not to have as many flashback scenes. I got to find a way to tell the story straight line, unless I'm going to do a non-linear story. That still intrigues me. You know, maybe that's because I fell under the influence of Pulp Fiction 30 years ago and I never let it go. As you know, a lot of people didn't like that movie because it was so non-linear, it was so cut up. So, yeah, I mean, I tend not to be a flowery writer, and I don't use a lot of analogies, and so somebody said that my writing is expository, whatever that means. I guess it means I tell it like it is, but I kind of like that style, so I'll probably stick with that style. But that's the one thing, probably cutting down on the flashbacks and finding another way to do it. So,
There's another
yes.
question over there. There's another one.
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I was gonna say, how did you promote the book?
Well, I tried to get my niece to read it, and she wouldn't. But she did come to my book reading, so I'm promoting it. How did I promote the book? I had a publicist, and I'm trying to look away from Shelley when I talk about my publicist. I mean, he was a nice guy, and I think COVID got in the way. He did a couple good things. He got me interviewed by a book blog called Book Pleasures, and, you know, part of the problem with having a website when you know, I mean, I don't have anything going that would make me interesting on a website, so every little thing you can get. So that interview came into play. He held a contest on Goodreads and gave away 10 books, but I don't know that did anything for sales. And then, you know, trying to give author talk. And this one is great because the first author talk I gave was at the Southfield Library in the Detroit Metro. And the attendance was just outstanding. I had 0 people show up. It was a very cold night. I'm using every excuse. There was no wine, no crackers, no cookies. But yeah, so, and then, you know, one other talk that I had agreed to do at a public library in the area, no one signed up for, so I just didn't do it. But, and I have tried to get, you know, the book reviewed by people, but I haven't had much luck. It's very tough when you're an unknown author. You know, in fact, I called the Detroit Public Library, the city of Detroit. We don't have first-time authors give talks at our library. So that, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles. So, and I guess somebody told me that the major publishers won't put much into marketing until you prove that you can sell at least 15,000 copies of the book. So, yeah, it's a tough road. So, but it's fun. I enjoy it. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, sort of a, well, I'm not sure how to say what kind of question. I've heard of cases where gynecologists who do problem pregnancies having to face malpractice premium, what do you call it?
Hikes.
Well, yeah, of $1 million a year.
Mm.
Is that something, is it that bad?
A million I haven't heard of, but the average cost for malpractice insurance in my department in Detroit, and Michigan is quite a litigious place, the maternal fetal medicine division, our cost for malpractice is about $45,000 a year with one exception. And that doc now hit $315,000.
Oh.
Just the premium for his insurance.
Yeah.
So, you know, my fellowship director for maternal fetal medicine once said, the best defense against malpractice is to always practice good medicine. And I've tried to live that, although my mistakes are legion, just like anybody else's. But you do the best you can. And the other thing is, you have to write notes, and that's what kills so many physicians. You know, if you don't write it, it didn't happen. And you know, so I kind of leave it there. I could tell stories. I could tell stories.
What did you learn about yourself through this whole process?
What did I learn about myself? That I can become type A for brief periods of time. Only brief. That I do have the discipline to, you know, to write. What else did I learn about myself? That a whole bunch of stuff just comes up when you're writing. It's really fun. The stuff that you know, incorporate into what you're writing. You know, one of my teachers at Willard School, which is no longer a grade school, on 17th and Russell, she had such a big influence in my life, and I just took the time to fit her into the story and write about, you know, her. All fictionalized, all of it fictionalized. But what else did I learn about myself? I still don't spell very well, and I don't type fast, and that's okay. I type about as fast as I think, which is dangerous. So, but yeah, I think that I was able to prove that I have the discipline to be a serious writer. So, and by the way, in terms of serious writer, I would take a little break for 5 minutes, and on some of those 5-minute breaks, I would be composing my, you know, Nobel acceptance speech. And then on some of those 5-minute breaks, I would be asking myself, who in their right mind would read that? So you go both ways.
So have you started your outline for your next book?
I have, and that's about all I've done.
So what's the outline about?
Well, just broadly speaking, it's about what happens when people turn a blind eye to unethical, unseemly behavior. And I don't have the story put together, but we see it all the time in society. You know, from the Catholic priests to the drug companies that know that something's wrong and won't do anything about it, to right here in Minneapolis. I mean, you know, what did Chauvin have? 18 charges of excessive force, and people turned a blind eye to it, and then we wind up in tragedy. This is a theme for me that happens over and over and over again in society. And so I think I'd like to take a crack at that. I don't know what form it's gonna take. It'll probably be within the medical research realm. Not that there are any unethical or, behavioral problems about it. But yeah, I've seen my share. In fact, a couple of them are alluded to in the book. Say what? Oh. Yes.
What would you tell your younger self, so your college self who was the failed English major, what would you tell them now that you're a published author? What advice would you give?
Well, let's see, don't go to no. Liana works at McAllister, was gracious enough to come to the reading tonight. No, it was a wonderful experience at McAllister. What would I tell myself? Well, what I would have done if I had it to do over again, I would have developed more discipline. I mean, discipline is just everything in writing a book. And people do it different ways, Some people thump at it, like I told you, every morning, for 2 hours, and others will, go a 3-week period of time and do nothing but write. And some of them will stay up with a 6-pack of beer or a bottle of wine and write. I can't do that. I'll just fall asleep. But to my younger self, I would have said, well, one of the things that I did do that I would do over again is go out and get experience. Go out and get experience so you have something to write about. That kind of fiction, because I'm not a fantasy type of writer. But I would have made myself more disciplined somehow as an undergrad and more disciplined about writing. So, yeah.
I have another one.
Yes.
I'm in a book club, and we just got through reading a book called 7 Days in June by Tia Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a line in there which kind of struck me, and I said, well, it's concerning publishing. I think that's one of the reasons why I asked that question earlier. And I was like, well, I know an author. Let me ask him this question. Now, I don't know if you have the answer to this or not, but there was a line in the book that said, and the book is about a Black author,
Mm-hmm.
and what she went through to get her book. She got her book published, and she's surrounded by a lot of other Black authors, and there was some dialogue in there. And one of the dialogue was saying the publishing industry has a hard time processing Black characters. Well, let's see, I gotta take my glasses off so I can see. Characters unless they were struggling. We are expected to write about trauma, oppression, or slavery because those are easily marketable Black stresses, types, I'm sorry. Do you find that true or not, or I don't know if you dug into that when you were writing your book?
No, I can't say that I did, because I just, I wrote about what happened, and, I didn't get a lot of feedback. They just called me and said they wanted to publish the book. Now, they did have editors, which I was excited about, and the editors made some criticisms that were good for a next book. But if I had acted on the criticisms that they made, I would have had to have rewritten the whole book, and I wasn't prepared to do that. And that wasn't a condition. They'd already accepted it for publication. But specifically to your question, maybe that's true. And there certainly are elements of the Black experience in the book that I wrote. But I don't know exactly how to answer that. One of the main characters is Black and in a prominent position in a majority white hospital, and he talks about some of the issues that he's facing. But I guess the irony of it is that the people who publish this book are from South Carolina. I've never met them, but they say that you can tell 85% of the time the race of the person on the other end of the phone, and this guy is not Black. And he's very Southern, and I think that he is an anti-vaxxer. But for whatever reason, he thought the book would sell, and so he published it.
Okay.
So, I don't doubt that what they're saying is true, but I just don't have that,
You
you
don't
know,
have the experience.
that experience, yeah.
Okay.
And the other kind of funny thing was, the publisher was a geologist who decided to become a book publisher. And he's published 250 books since 2011 when he started, so he's pretty successful. And then, completely unrelated, the person who did my website was a geologist who decided to become a website designer. And she lived in California, he lived in South Carolina, they never heard of each other. So I got a thing for geologists. A professional thing, baby. Yes. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.